Hot tenting has been on my radar for a few years, and I finally decided to take the plunge with my first setup. And for those of you that don't know, hot tenting is winter tenting with a portable wood burning stove. So in other words, it's just like regular camping, but with an increased risk of death from fire, carbon monoxide poisoning, and hypothermia. Because of all these added risks, I really wanted to test it out in a safe backyard environment before I went out on a longer trip. So I got the opportunity to stay at a family member's house, and luckily while I was there a large winter storm hit, and I was able to put all the gear through rain, freezing rain, snow, 30-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and temperatures that got down to 16 degrees Fahrenheit. In this video I want to give you a quick rundown of my setup, my basic gear, as well as the results from the temperature data and the carbon monoxide data that I collected. For the stove, I used a Winnerwell Woodlander medium, and I went with this stove because I had really good customer service with spring bar canvas when I was asking them questions. Plus it was on sale when I got it, and really it looked nice. It looked higher quality and more polished than other stoves I've been looking at. Setup was super easy. It took less than 2 minutes. It packed up really nice and small, and I found it really easy to get a fire started with really good draw every single time. It was really easy to cook on. It's got about an 8-inch cooktop area for small pots and pans. That worked great. And really, for the record, I am in love with this stove. For the tent, I used a Luxe Megahorn 4-person Tipi with stove jack. I went with the white version on this one. It had slightly more rain protection and a small increase in insulation, I guess you could say. It's supposed to have better heat retention. If you're wondering kind of what this tent fabric feels like on this TP, just imagine what a rainfly feels like on a normal tent, and that's pretty much what it is. You can check out their website to get more specifics on what it is, but yeah, it's basically just like a rainfly on a normal tent. Works really well. Also, setup was really easy. You just hammer in 4 stakes, prop up the middle with the included center pole, and then just hammer in all the remaining stakes and guy wires, and you're all set. Oh, and there also is a separate top cover that goes on, and that allows for good ventilation and air draw while you're running the hot tent, which is really important. You can cinch it up and make it a little bit more airtight if you're not running the stove, or you can leave the vents kind of open for airflow. So first impressions, this is perfect size for 1 person and a stove. It's going to be cramped for 2 people and a stove, but you could definitely make it work. If you want a stove, there is no way you'd have more than 2 people in here, FYI. You could probably fit 4 small people in without a stove, since they said it's a 4-person tent. But yeah, ideally this is like a 1-person winter camping tent. That it gives you enough space. It should be noted that you're not supposed to sleep with the stove running. It's too much of a fire and carbon monoxide risk. And once that stove goes out, there's no real insulation in these tents. So the inside of the tent will drop down to outside ambient temperatures just within minutes of the fire going out. So you are going to need a really good sleeping bag rated for the weather conditions you're staying in. And you're also going to need an insulated sleeping pad or some sort of winter sleeping system to go from there. For my system, I used a camping cot. There's a really cheap one to keep me up off the ground. On top of that, I had a foam pad. On top of that, I had an REI flash blow-up pad. And on top of that, I put a Mylar blanket just to reflect the heat back up towards my body. And then, of course, I was sleeping in my sleeping bag. It was a Marmot Trestle Zero, rated for 0 degrees. And overall, that system kept me super hot all night long. For the temperature research, I just used a standard glass thermometer to get ambient temperatures kind of at different heights. And then I also used an infrared FLIR camera to kind of get surface temperatures of stuff to kind of see where the hot spots were, and the combination of those 2 things worked really well. Inside of the tent, the top of the TP obviously was the hottest because that's where the warm air rose to, and up towards the top, if I stood up in there, my head, it was between 60 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Head and chest height in the TP was between 40 and 60 degrees, obviously warmer the closer you got to the stove. And then the floor stayed around 30 to 40 degrees because it's just bare ground with snow on it in certain spots. So it stayed pretty cold as you got closer to the ground. The stove jack is made out of a special fire-resistant material, and that's where the stove pipe goes up and out so you don't melt your tent fabric. And the stove pipe was around 200 degrees itself, and then the stove jack that material around it, quickly dropped it to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the tent fabric next to the stove jack area dropped to around 100 degrees. So that really served its purpose. And I just had the straight stovepipe. I didn't have any extra protector around the stovepipe. So stove jack definitely did a great job of reducing the heat as you got closer to the tent fabric. For the carbon monoxide research, I used a first alert carbon monoxide detector, and carbon monoxide detectors kind of work a little bit different than like a smoke detector. They'll go off at different concentrations for different amounts of time. So for example, 400 parts per million of carbon monoxide in the air at 4 minutes will trigger the alarm to go off. Whereas if you had 70 parts per million carbon monoxide, it would take about an hour of that to trigger the alarm. So I had this thing set up all around me. I had it up high, I had it up down low. It never went off. So I can't tell you exactly what the carbon monoxide levels went to. All I can tell you is it never once exceeded a dangerous amount. I would like to note that the whole time I had the stove running, I had the top part kind of open for ventilation, so the cap was on, but it wasn't cinched tight. And then I also unzipped about 1.5 feet of area on the door just to allow proper airflow. The side of the Tipi facing into the wind, I sealed up that half on the ground with snow, but then the other side that wasn't facing the wind, I left that kind of open so air could move underneath the Tipi as well. So I had adequate airflow the whole time. So overall, this tent and stove and sleeping bag combo worked amazingly well. I had so much fun doing this winter camping. This was the most pleasant winter camping experience I've ever had. It was so fun to just warm up. I got so hot in my tent, I actually had to take my shirt off because I started to sweat. So I was just sitting in a tent. It's like a winter storm warning going on outside, and I'm sitting there warming up by the fire, listening and looking at a crackling fire and eating warm chicken noodle soup. It was just like the best winter camping experience I've ever had. So they do work. I was really impressed. If you're thinking about getting one and you like camping, this is a great way to experience camping in the winter.